what's cracking? It is your girl, Lillian Francis. And welcome to this two-part series on beat making for beginners in Ableton. I remember the first time I opened up Ableton, I was so overwhelmed by all the buttons and knobs and numbers and words that I did not understand, and I found it almost impossible to make a beat. So if you're new to Ableton, you're just getting started and you want to learn how to make the music that you hear in your head, but you're not sure where to start, you are in the right place. I promise you, even though it feels overwhelming right now, every single time you open Ableton and learn something new, you're going to get better and better. So stick with it. So like I mentioned, this is a two-part series, and in this first part we are going to be looking at how to program in your drums, and in the second video we are going to look at the melody, bringing in the synth and the pads and the bass and things like that. So if you're ready to start producing your own music, to start producing music that you are proud of and excited to share, then let's get started. Fam, let us dive right in. Splash! All right, family, welcome to Ableton. So the first thing you need is a MIDI track, and this is what's going to contain your MIDI information. You should just have a MIDI track already loaded in your empty Ableton set, but if you don't have one, you can hit Shift-Command-T and you'll create a new MIDI track. Next, we are going to grab an empty drum rack. So we can go over here on the left to our browser. Now this is like our pantry in Ableton. It is where we get all of our sounds, all of our instruments, all of our effects. It's where we go for the ingredients, essentially. Now under categories, you're gonna see sounds, drums, instruments. We wanna go to drums because we wanna grab an empty drum rack. Now if I double click this drum rack, it's gonna load onto my MIDI track. And then what you're gonna see here is actually a sampler device where we can put in a bunch of different samples. And then when we hit the corresponding note on our keyboard, C1 for example, it's gonna trigger whatever sample we have on the pad. So I'm gonna fill up my drum rack with a bunch of samples that I might wanna use. The most important ones to grab are gonna be kick, snare, and a hi-hat. These are essentially the three things that you need to make a beat, but you can also grab miscellaneous percussion, rides, rims, shakers, snare articulation, toms, woods. There's a bunch of stuff that you can choose from. Let's start with the kick. I'm going to open up my kick option here, and let's go through some of our different kicks and find one or two that we like. Once we find one that we like, we can just drag it down and place it on one of the samples. Let's grab a couple more. That's nice. Okay, great. I always like to grab a few different options and then whatever I'm feeling when I'm actually working with the beat and hearing it with the snare and the other sounds, then I can change, whatever sample I want. All right, let's grab some snares. Sure. And maybe let's grab a clap or a snap or two. They add really good texture either by themselves or layered in with a snare. Ooh, that's wobbly. Cool. All right, and next we're gonna grab some hi-hats. I like all three of these, so I'm gonna select one, hold down shift to select the last one that I want, and then drag all of them in. Great, and let's make sure we get at least one open hat. Cool. Feel free to go crazy with this, add in as many different samples as you want, and actually just for fun, let's grab some miscellaneous percussion and just drop it all in. So I'm going to select a different view of my drum rack. So you can see here, we could see C1 through whatever this is. If I just select up here, one box up, you're gonna have more access to place more samples. Ooh, those are all cool. Let's grab all those and bring them in. Excellent. All right, so now I have a track with a bunch of samples that I want to use that I can create my beat with. So next what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a MIDI clip, and the MIDI clip is what's going to actually contain my MIDI information and tell the track or the instrument what to play. So maybe we'll start with a 2-bar loop. So I'm going to select 2 bars of time. Now let's create a new MIDI clip, Shift-Command M. Now, once we've created this MIDI clip, you can see that we have our clip view down here, and we're gonna see all of the sounds that we brought in to our sampler on the left here, and then we have this piano roll here. Now, what I can do is just double click to place a note in the piano roll. Now, you didn't actually hear that sample when I double clicked and placed it, and that's because our preview button isn't on here. I like to have my preview button on here so that as I click and create, I can hear it. So I recommend you keep that on. All right, let's delete all of these notes by just clicking in the background here and then selecting all of these notes and hitting delete. Now, drums have always been the most challenging for me. I am not rhythmically inclined necessarily. This was definitely the most challenging part when I first started producing music. I just had no idea what should go where. I had no idea what constituted a good beat, knew nothing about rhythm theory or really anything for that matter. So if you're like me, this might be a little bit challenging, but what we're gonna do is we're gonna break it down and kind of create the simplest beat possible, and then we can branch out from there. So a really simple, super common, almost foolproof beat is going to be a beat with our kick on the down beats. And that means the first and the third beat of a bar. And by the way, this is one bar or one measure, which in this case, because we're in 4/4, contains 1, 2, 3, 4 beats. So we got a kick on the 1 and the 3, and let's go ahead and duplicate that across. So I'm going to select the amount of time that we want duplicated, which is going to be that 1 bar. And on the way, we're also going to select those 2 notes and then hit Command D to duplicate it across. You can also add a kick on the offbeat if you want, which is on the 2 and the 4. And that might sound familiar. That's a 4 on the floor style beat. Now we're gonna add the snare to the offbeat. So let's go ahead and just draw those in. Cool. Groovy. And then I'm just gonna layer in maybe one of those cool claps on top of the snare. Cool. And let's make this a little bit louder by holding down Command and hovering it over the note. And you're going to see that I have that 100 number, and that is referring to the velocity. You can have a velocity of anywhere from 1 to 127, and typically the harder the velocity, the louder the note. So I'm just going to hold down Command, hover over my note, click, and drag up. There we go. And let's add a different clap for the second one to add some variation. Yeah, so we're gonna select those and duplicate them over. So now I have a pretty basic beat. And now let's go ahead and add some hi-hats and round out this beat. So I'm just going to double click in the hi-hat. Yeah. Now there's so much room for creativity with hi-hats, but let me show you a couple different ways we can do this. One, you can put the hi-hat between the kick and the snare for a kind of housey disco style groove. Like this. Now already we've made a super classic common beat, but what you can essentially do from here is just start mixing things up however you want, right? You want to take a kick and bring it back 1/16th note. You want to take another kick and push it back in time a 16th note. Also wonderful. You can take some snares and bump them off, right? Let's grab these. Ooh, honestly, that's kind of cool. Sounds weird the first time you hear it, but music is repetition. So if you keep repeating it, it's gonna sound cool. And I'm gonna put my snares back and let's have a little bit of fun with our hi-hats. Now, right now I have a 16th note grid on, but I can change it by making it smaller or larger, switching it to a triplet grid, whatever. And we can do this with our grid commands, which are Command 1 to make your grid smaller. Ta-da. And now when I double click, it's gonna make some really small notes. Right? And we can make a lot of little micro kind of rolls with that. And just kind of placing them wherever and listening and then seeing if it sounds good. That is my technique for drum programming. Or you can hit Command 2 to make your grid bigger. And we can do some bigger and bigger hi-hats. Now we can also create a triplet grid if we want, and that is by hitting Command 3. Now you can see in the space where we used to have 2 grid lines essentially. So we had 1 here and 1 here. We now have 1, 2, and 3. And you can make some really cool rolls with that. So I'm going to hit Command 1 a couple times to get a smaller grid. Well, actually, that's good. We'll do an 8th note triplet. And by the way, I know this is an 8th note triplet because I have in the bottom right-hand corner, it says 1, 8, T. It's an 8th note triplet. Cool, so let's create a little triplet hi-hat roll at the end. And I'm just gonna hit Command D to duplicate those notes over. Sweet. So normally when I'm programming hi-hats, I'll just race between like a smaller and bigger and triplet grids and just kind of place hi-hats as I like and how I feel the groove and then settle on something cool. So I'm actually gonna just take a second here and fiddle around a little bit and see if I can come up with a cool pattern that I like. And by the way, if you want to make your notes longer or shorter, you can hold down Shift and then press your left and your right arrows. Now, this is not actually making the sound longer or shorter because if we go into our device view, which you can hit Shift Tab to do, and then you can see the actual instrument, and we find that hi-hat that we are using this guy right here, it is on trigger mode, which means that as soon as the MIDI note is triggered in our drum roll, it's going to trigger this entire sample from start to finish. So it doesn't matter actually how long the note is. So making the notes bigger or smaller in the case of hi-hats doesn't actually make a difference. If, however, you did want the length of the notes to impact the length of the sample, you can switch it over to gate mode and it will stop playing when the note is over with. But since these hi-hats are so short, it doesn't really matter for this sample. Cool. So here's a beat that I came up with that I think sounds pretty good. Now, a couple things I'm going to do to make this more interesting. One, velocity plays a huge role in how we feel drums. So I want different velocities for my hi-hats. So what I'm going to do is I could either go in and change the velocity of each one individually. Oh, and by the way, if you change the velocity on one note, the next time you create a note, it's going to be at the velocity of what you changed the last note to. So if you're noticing that every time you draw in a note, it's like way low or way high or just not the velocity you want, all you have to do is change the velocity to what you want it to be. And the next one you create will be of that same velocity. All right, so as I was saying, I want different velocities for my different hi-hats. So I could either change them all individually by holding down Command, right? Or even grabbing down here in the velocity lane. But I don't like this way as much because what happens if you have two notes and they're the exact same velocity? Hard to find which one it is down here. Changing each velocity individually makes a lot of sense if you have a specific rhythm in mind that you want, but I just want kind of a random, fun, varied pattern. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this piano note, which is going to select all of my hi-hats on this row, and then I'm going to use my randomize to randomize the velocity. So I'm going to bring down the randomize to about 7 or 8 here. I'm going to hit randomize. Then it's going to randomize the velocity of all my notes by 8 velocity points up and down. Boop. Now see, they're all a little bit different. I could go ahead and hit randomize again if I want it even more random. Cool. And one last thing, I'm going to take some of these hi-hats and I'm going to put them on a different hi-hat just to add some variation. We'll put those there. And I'll put these maybe down here. Now, that's not something you want to do if you're making drums that you want to sound realistic. This is just more for like fun, playful, creative stuff. And in the same fashion of kind of mixing things up and getting different sonic palettes from the same hit, I'm going to grab every other snare and just move it down one. So now it's playing different snare. That honestly sounds a little bit too high. The snares sound a little too different. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into this 420 snare and I'm going to transpose it down a couple steps just so it's a little bit more in line with the pitch of the other snare. Now, what we can do to continue to build this up and make it more interesting is to add effects to individual pads. So I can add any one of these audio effects that I have here to any specific pad. So for example, we could throw a reverb on the snare, or we could put a flanger on the hi-hat. Let's do something fun here. Let's put a delay on one of the snares. So I'm gonna grab my delay audio effect here. Let's see, I wanna throw it on my second snare. So this one right here. Now, without changing any of the settings, we get something like this. And I do like that 3/16 note delay, which is what we have it set to right now, but way too much feedback. So I'm going to bring it down here. I really only want maybe one kind of noticeable delay. There we go. Ooh, let's try something fun here. Let's throw a, what is she called? Let's throw a beat repeat on one of the hi-hats. Ooh, it says some pitch decay. Bring down the chant so it doesn't actually happen every time. Bring down the gate so we don't have as many. Fire! Okay, cool. So much fun to be had there, guys. Wow. Awesome. Okay, guys, we have laid down the foundation for our beat. We have got the drums done. We are ready to move on to our melody. So in the next video, we're going to be looking at how to bring in synths, program bass, add effects, etc., etc. So be sure to subscribe and look out for that when it comes out. All right, until then, happy beat making. Bye.